Hey guys, Cody with After 5 Outdoors back again with another rules and regulations video. This one is going to be for the 2021 Minnesota black bear hunting season, which is getting really close. So this is Tony Elwell from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. He's a conservation officer up here in the northwest corner of the state. So most of the things that we're going to talk about, there's a lot of zones and all that different things throughout the state, but mostly it's going to talk about here. But if you have a little bit of knowledge about some other stuff, we can throw that in too. So we're going to talk a little bit about, first of all, we're going to talk about the season dates and when baiting starts for this year. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Baiting is going to start this Friday, the 13th. That's when we'll be allowed to start to bait and establish baits and registered baits and all that. The season itself will open on September 1st, which I believe is a Wednesday, something like that, and that'll run through October 17th.
So you got about, literally, you get 2 weeks before season, roughly, to start baiting, and then you got about a month and a half of actual hunting.
Yep,
so
that's correct.
All right, so let's talk about licensing a little bit. In Minnesota, what do you need to hunt bear?
You need a bear license. So in Minnesota, we've got basically two different areas that we can hunt. We've got the permit area, which traditionally people call the quota area. That's where we have specific areas marked off for bears, and there's a certain amount of bears that can be harvested out of those areas. That's kind of the traditional bear habitat here in Minnesota. And then we've got the no quota area, which is the remainder of the state up here in the northwest and down towards the south. And
the quota area, you have to put in actually pretty early in the year to get a draw license out of there, right?
Yep, that's come and gone now. Generally, May 1st-ish is when the deadline for that application is. And, today's the 9th of August. That lottery's been completed, and, personnel that have been successful have been notified and they've purchased their license by now.
And now, I remember in the past that there was a surplus license buying period, and is that passed now too? That
opened up on the 4th of August, so there could potentially be some licenses left. Generally, those get bought up pretty quick. So any quota areas that either people didn't buy the license after being drawn, or just not enough people applied and there was surplus tags, those go on sale on the 4th. They went on sale, and anybody can come in and buy one of those. Okay. So basically, you've got those two areas, and you can buy both licenses. If you're drawn for that quota license, you can buy that, and you can also buy a no quota. So potentially, a person could take 2 bears if they were drawn for that quota tag. They could also buy that no quota tag. Okay. But if you don't have that no quota tag, you can only take 1 bear with a no quota license in a no quota area.
So let's move into baiting a little bit now. Like we said before, baiting starts Friday the 13th. To bait legally, what are some of the parameters that you need to follow?
Okay, first thing is you got to have a license. You have to have a license to establish a bait. That bait needs to be registered as well. So starting on the 13th, an individual who has a license or a person acting for a licensed individual can go out and start to bait. Each individual bear hunter is allowed to establish and register 3 baits. Basically, you establish your bait and then you have to register it. So there's 2 different ways to register that bait. The traditional way is a paper form that you can download from the website, and you fill out all the information and mail it in. Much easier way to do it now, and we've had it for a number of years now. We've got a website that you register for it. Basically, valid email address, you can register for this site, and then all you do is you go in after you buy your license. You can go in and find the map and find exactly where your bait is, drop a pin on it, and you're done. You answer a few questions.
Now, when you put the GPS pin on there, that's typically for inspection purposes, correct?
That's correct. Okay. Yes.
So we've got our bait. You need your license. If you want to have somebody tend your bait, they have to have your license number with them.
That's correct.
But they don't have to specifically be licensed themselves, right, if they're acting on your behalf, running your baits. Okay, so you got your bait set up. Let's talk about private land first. You got your bait set up. You have to have a marking on your bait with your DNR number. Is there anything else that you have to do? Is there any parameters to the size of the sign?
There are. So whether you're baiting on private or public land, you have to register that bait. That bait needs to be signed. And that sign has to be made out of wood, metal, or plastic, anywhere from 6 by 10 up to, I believe, 18 by 24 inches, the size of that sign. What else? Has to be between 6 and 10 feet off the ground, and it has to be within 20 feet of your bait. And on that sign needs to be one of three things, just like an ice shelter during the winter. Either the hunter, their name and address on there, or their driver's license number, or their Minnesota DNR number. Now, whose name needs to be on that sign? Basically anybody that's going to have anything to do with that bait, whether they're hunting there, whether they're tending it, whether they're establishing it, whoever's going to be messing with that bait, one of those three things needs to go on that sign. So you could potentially have 6 people's information on a sign. Okay. Other things with bait, it's unlawful to establish a bait within 100 yards of where bait was previously placed. So some people will do a test bait or something to that effect before they're allowed to legally bait. That needs to come out, and you can't establish a bait within 100 yards of that.
So that's kind of made so you can't be feeding bears throughout the summer. Well, I got a hot bait here and I'm going to set one up. So it's kind of a leads into the fair chase a little bit more.
Exactly, yeah. Other things with baits, can't be established within 150 yards of a campsite, whether that, an established campsite, whether somebody's occupying it or not. Half mile has to be a half mile from a garbage dump. Things like that can't be within 100 yards of another registered bait, another hunter, or even your own.
And purposes of that, I would assume would be to kind of limit the drawing of bears into where they become problem bears in problem areas, because we typically get a lot of complaints about bears in dumpsters and things like that. So
right.
that's kind of the reasoning behind that. So when we're talking about baits now too, there's some things that are legal to use as bait, and there's some things that are illegal to use as bait. What are some of the things that can you tell us a little bit what's unlawful and what's lawful?
Right. It's a lot easier to tell you what you can't do as far as placing bait. So basically anything metal, plastic, anything non-biodegradable can't be in your bait. So you can't have a 5-gallon bucket full of stuff laying on the ground, or a bag, a plastic bag or trash or something like that. Or a lot of people use bread. Bread spread on the ground is great. Bread in a bag is unlawful because of that plastic. Okay. Other things, can't use any kind of bone from mammal. No mammal bone itself, no meat that has bone in it. In the regulation it states something to the effect, you can't use a carcass that's more than 25% intact. Well, if it's mammal, you can't use it at all if it's got bone in it. So no mammal bone in any kind, shape, whatever, no mammal bone. Any material has to be readily biodegradable. Other than that, if it's biodegradable and it's not mammal bone, you can use it. Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about drums and using logs and stuff like that. What I know there are some guidelines to drums and stuff like that. What are some of those guidelines? Traditionally,
a drum or a bait barrel could only be used on private land. Well, I believe it was last season, maybe the season prior. Laws were written to allow barrels or drums on public property. So basically a drum is anything that's 30 gallons or larger, plastic, metal. If you're going to use a drum on public land, you have to pay what they call a surcharge. It's a $5 surcharge per barrel. So a licensed hunter can have 3 baits. So you could potentially have 3 different barrels at each one of those baits. You'd have to pay $5 for each one of those. Backing up to the website, if you are going to have a drum or a barrel, there's a little button you can click. Yes, I've paid the surcharge and all that stuff. That drum has to be secured to a tree with a chain, public or private land. And then the other provision on public land is it has to have that same information that you have on the sign. You don't have to have everybody's name on there, just whoever has established that, whoever that bait name is in, they've got to have either their name and address, their DNR number, or their driver's license number on that barrel.
Okay, so that is specifically for the drum itself.
That's correct. Another thing with barrel, it can't contain any kind of mechanical device, like a deer feeder, you know how it's got the little motor that spreads. Can't have any kind of mechanical device to dispense food. Basically it's just a hole in the barrel, you stuff it full of bait, and the bear can reach in there and grab that. One other thing I forgot to mention was, you can have a bait in a barrel, or in a bucket, let's say, and you go out, sit in your stand, sit in your spot, you can put that bucket on the ground, that's fine. But that bucket's got to come with you. So anything that you bring out that's not biodegradable, you have to be in attendance with that if it's going to stay there. So when you leave, that bucket's got to come out with you. Okay. I've never heard of anybody doing that, but maybe somebody's got a bucket full of grease or something liquid that they don't want to dump, you know. something for scent, who knows.
So we're going to talk just real briefly. I know on last year's video I got some comments about cameras. We're going to talk real quickly just about public land, and then we'll switch to private. So this is going to apply to your WMA'S and your state-owned lands that you hunt. If you put a bait out and you did everything that you need to do as far as registering the bait and also registering your barrel if you're using a barrel, how about your cameras? Can you use cameras on public land? Can you leave them there? And also we'll touch a little bit about stands.
So on wildlife management areas, it's unlawful to leave anything out overnight. During bear season, a licensed bear hunter can establish a bait and can leave a stand up in that WMA overnight. That stand has to be marked in the same way that their sign does, either their name and address, excuse me, their driver's license number, their DNR number, and that sign has to be visible from the ground so a conservation officer can see it if it's up underneath the seat or on the ladder, something like that. Now, trail cameras, you can't leave overnight. So cameras are still unlawful to leave out in a wildlife management area.
On a WMA, you can leave your stand as long as it's marked. You can leave your bait barrel as long as it's chained to the tree and marked, but you cannot leave a camera.
That's correct. Okay. That is correct.
Now private, switching to private, is there anything else on WMA'S?
Not really, but one other thing I wanted to mention, there's different public land out there. There's county land, there's federal land. Those regulations may differ from what the state requires. So if you're going to hunt something like that, it's a good idea to check with whoever governs that.
And make sure that your site specific, because one rule may not or may apply to another plot of land.
That's correct.
So switching to private land, you can, in a sense, you're able to do a lot more.
That's correct. You can leave whatever you want out there, as long as, if it's bait, if it's in the bait, it's got to be still at the same parameters, has to be biodegradable, can't have any mammal bone, all of those things. But as far as stands and cameras, you can do whatever you need to do. Your barrel doesn't have to be signed if you have a barrel. It doesn't need to be registered if if it's on private land. Still needs to be secured somehow to a tree so that bear can't run off with your barrel and all that. But generally it's, the same types of regulations. A little less restrictive, but generally the same on private.
Okay, so one thing that we want to touch on, we kind of missed this in the licensing part, but let's say you have a young child that's 10, 12 years old. Can you just enlighten us a little bit about how that works if they want to hunt bear?
Yep. So legally, anybody 10 years or older can hunt bear, can legally hunt bear. Anybody who's 12 or older that was born after December 31st, 1979 would require a firearm safety certification or the equivalent, the hunter apprenticeship or whatever. So that's who can hunt bear, that's who can be licensed for bears. The other thing with licenses in hunting, there's no party hunting allowed for bears. So if you and I were out hunting together, you couldn't shoot 2 bears, even though I'm sitting next to you. So only the person whose name's on the license can actually take that bear.
Let's talk a little bit about legal method of taking. Let's talk about firearms, bows, and things of that nature. What is lawful, what is not? Can you give us a little info on what you can and cannot use to take bears in Minnesota?
Yep, there isn't a specific license. So a bear license is you can use a bow or a firearm, whether it's a shotgun, rifle, pistol, whatever, or archery equipment. Same kind of regulations as firearms as deer, as far as poundage and things like that. And all that stuff can be found, hunting regulations under big game and archery and things like that.
And I'll post some of that on the screen here too, so we don't burn through a whole bunch of time just going through calibers and stuff like that.
Yep. But so let's say you're gonna go out and bow hunt. You're legally allowed to carry a firearm with you while you're bow hunting bears. You don't have to have a permit to carry anything like that. You can carry a sidearm. But with that said, if you don't have a permit to carry, that firearm's got to be unloaded before you get on your wheeler, get in your truck, before you transport. You can't transport a loaded firearm in or on a motor vehicle. So if you don't have a permit to carry, we run into this from time to time. That pistol that you have with you, it's legal, but you just have to unload it if you're going to drive around.
Right. So once you get to your site and you start moving out to your hunting area on foot, you can now load your firearm.
That's correct.
All right. So moving on to the next thing, what makes a black bear legal in Minnesota?
Well, it's got to be black or brown. Can't shoot a white bear. Other things, it's got to be an adult or can't be this year's cub. So basically anything that's a yearling or older, anything over 100 pounds generally is going to be something that's going to be not this year's cub. And usually you're going to have cubs with mama, and it's going to be a little bit easier to tell what size that bear is. But
now, just on a quick note, collared or tag bears are legal to shoot in Minnesota, but you're encouraged not to shoot them because they're being used for research and things like that. So now you can shoot either or sexes as well.
That's correct.
So,
yeah, there's no restriction on sex bear. Basically the only thing is white, can't shoot a white bear, can't shoot a cub.
all right, so you're in your stand, bear comes in, you shoot it, it goes down, you got your bear right there, you're sitting in your stand. After you calm down a little bit, what's the next thing you got to do?
First thing you do after you know the bear's dead, you got to rip off your site validation tag and validate it, just like you would anything for deer hunting. That has to be validated at the site of the kill before you move the bear, before you roll it over, before you field dress it, before you hang it in the tree, before you move it. Validate the tag, keep it with you. That's the first step.
Now that tag does not have to be affixed right away, correct?
That is correct. You're allowed to manually drag that bear out of the woods. You can hook it up to a vehicle and drag it if it's dragged on the ground. You don't have to affix that tag until one of two things: either put it in a motor vehicle or on a motor vehicle, four-wheeler, pickup truck, or you throw it in a trailer, something like that. Same idea as deer hunting. You know, if you put the tag on the bear and you're dragging it through the woods, there's a good chance the thing's going to get ripped off. So that's why we don't have to have that tag affixed if you're going to manually drag that bear out. But it does need to be validated before you move it. That tag needs to stay with that bear before it gets moved. Once you put it in a vehicle, it has to be affixed. Same idea as our deer, with the exception of bears don't have antlers, right? So slit in the ear, between the tendon and the bone like a deer, or the other place is through the sternum. You can pop a hole around the sternum bone and then affix it with a wire or a string or a zip tie, something like that. But that needs to be validated before it's moved, affixed before it's transported, okay? And then after that, we have 48 hours to register that bear, or it needs to be registered before you process the bear. So you could skin the bear, you could quarter the bear, as long as that tag remains attached to that one of those quarters. That entire bear needs to stay together until it's registered. A couple different ways we can register bears. The traditional way, there's several registration stations. There's a list of them on the website. You go in there, whoever shot the bear, obviously whoever's tag is it, they have to be present if they're going to register it in person. If you go to a walk-in registration station, they're going to give you an envelope for a tooth. That's important. You need to get that. We'll talk more about that coming up here, but you can also do it online. You can do it over the phone. Either one of those options still has to be within 48 hours of the harvest. There's several questions that you'll have to answer either telephonically or on your keyboard, but you won't get a tooth envelope, obviously. You can stop into a registration station and grab one, or
you could probably get one, when you buy your license. That's what we usually do, is pick them up when we get our license. So
otherwise, if you can't get a hold of that tooth envelope, the DNR suggests you clean the tooth really well, dry it really well, wrap it in either paper towel or aluminum foil, toss it into a Ziploc, get all the air out of there, zip it up, and then put it in a padded envelope and then mail it in.
And then approximately, I think I got mine this summer, you'll get a letter from the DNR and they will tell you the approximate age of your bear.
Yep. That tooth sample needs to be submitted within 48 hours of the close of the season. So it's not like registration where you have to have that submitted or registered by 48 hours after you kill it. But 48 hours after the season, you got to have that in. And it's super important that folks do that. Wildlife managers get all kinds of information, age, things like that.
One thing that we did not cover in the license portion is, if you're going to go bear hunting, you need to buy your bear tag a day in advance. So you cannot buy your bear license at 7 in the morning, go out to your stand and shoot a bear that day. You have to wait till the next day before you can hunt.
Yep. So it's a little different than our deer licenses. Deer license, as long as it's purchased before that opening shooting hours, that license is valid. Well, bear, it's different, like you said. It's got to be the calendar day before. So the season starts on the 1st, you got to buy it on the 30th, or is it 31? I don't know how many days are in September,
right.
But it's got to be, can't buy it anytime on the 1st. It's not valid. So if you do, you forget, crap, didn't get my license. You got to wait till the second before that tag is valid.
All right, so now some states allow you to use dogs in pursuit of bears, but Minnesota is not quite that way. Can you tell us a little bit about the regulations on dogs in Minnesota?
Can't use dogs to hunt big game, but we can use a dog to retrieve big game that we know is wounded or dead. So same deal with deer as bears. So you got a bear, it's down, you can't find it, you want to use a dog, that's great, you can do that. Some provisions with that though, obviously. Whoever's licensed, whoever shot that bear, they've got to be with you, okay? They've got to be with the dog handler. If whoever's out there with you, everybody's got to wear blaze orange. That dog leash has to be at least no longer than 30 feet in length. Also, that dog has to have some kind of tag on it with the owner's name, address, phone number. You know, dog gets loose, winds up in Farmer Brown's front yard, we know whose dog it is. Other provisions, handheld lights or attached to the body, flashlights, headlamps, those are lawful. But again, got to have that blaze orange on, 30-footer, smaller leash, and name on the dog.
Okay, so probably the biggest issue with any hunting season, probably I would say your highest call volume, is got to do with trespassing. Can you talk about trespassing a little bit? Right.
Trespass, yep, biggest complaint we get during hunting season. Posted land is posted land. You can't go in if it's posted. We've got other land that it's not lawful to enter, and it doesn't need to be posted, agricultural land. Standing crops, crop residue, stubble, plowed, any kind of pasture, CRP, hybrid popple is egg land. That stuff doesn't need to be posted. So make sure you know where you're at and where you're hunting, and make sure you have permission to go in there. Super important.
Now, just a little extra kick on there, I guess. You've got your dog out, you're doing everything legally, you're tracking your bear, you come off of a WMA or you come off of a public land or private land that you have permission on, and you hit a spot of private land that's posted. You cannot go in there. You got to get permission from the owner. Hopefully they'll let you in there. Now, and that's the reason for the whole leash thing, is because then your dog doesn't just run in there. But for some crazy reason, your dog gets into private land that you don't have permission to be on. Can you go get your dog?
You can go get your dog. You have to go out on foot. You can't have a firearm with you, okay, without permission. Whether there's a live critter in there or not, if your dog is off a leash, same thing for small game. You're pheasant hunting, grouse hunting, your dog goes. You can go retrieve your dog, but you got to be on foot. You can't have a firearm with you to do that. Otherwise, if it's just your bear ran into some private land, you don't have permission, you got to have permission before you go in there after it.
So if you go get your dog, you immediately have to leave that posted land.
That's correct.
And then to be in accordance with the law on that trespass issue.
Yep.
All right, so one thing that we forgot to mention too, with the WMA'S and the whole hunting stands, is there a portion of time when that stand does have to come out for bear hunting only?
Yep. So like we said, a licensed bear hunter with a registered bait can leave a stand up as long as it's marked in the WMA up until the day before archery deer season opens up. So the Friday before, your stand's got to come out. Then following morning, archery deer hunters are out in the woods. They've got to bring stands in and out every day, so now bear hunters have to do the same thing.
Okay. All right, so kind of the last thing before we wrap this all up, let's talk a little bit about ATVs in bear hunting.
Same kind of rules any time of the year. Wildlife management area, ATVs are not allowed. Up here in the Northwest, in certain areas, you're allowed to bring it in certain times during rifle season. Bear season, there's no law allowing for you to use an ATV in a WMA. So you can't shoot a bear, get your ATV and drag it out. Now if there's a designated ATV trail through that WMA, which we do have, you're allowed to have that ATV on the trail. You could drag your bear to the trail and then drag it out. Yep. But if they're not allowed during the regular year, then you can't use them.
All right, so that kind of wraps it up for the 2021 Minnesota bear hunting regulations video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Follow the rules. Good luck. Any parting thoughts from you, Tony?
No, just be safe, have fun, and take care of yourselves.
All right. So with that being said, I hope that you can get out and enjoy God's great outdoors, and we will see you on the next one.